Well, thank you for that, Presbyter. I want to get through just a few more questions. I'm
Okay.
appreciative of your time. Scourging was,
Yeah.
you touch on it in the book, and unfortunately, cinematic depictions of this event vary tremendously. But, some reference the Jewish law of whipping, right, versus the
Yes.
Roman
Yes.
scourging. What did that look like, and was it supposed to be a capital punishment to the point of somebody's death?
Yeah. Very, very good question. So there is a distinction between a Jewish whipping and a Roman scourging. And very often in movies, Jesus is really being seen as being whipped, especially in the older movies. I know they try to, in that Passion of the Christ movie by Mel Gibson. First of all, they beat him with other things, and that's not in the gospel. But then they do have a scourging, but it's not. It's far worse than what any movie could depict. So let's talk about a Jewish whipping. The Jews were entitled to, and they had the authority to discipline their own. And that's why Pilate says, take him and judge him according to your own law. This is what he says about Jesus. St. Paul talks about that. St. Paul received a Jewish whipping, 39 lashes, 5 times. Okay. So that was something that was part of the punishment for blasphemy. And Paul experienced that. And I'm sure that other apostles also experienced that. So they had the right to whip Jesus up to 40 times. That was the limit of the law. Jews would stop at 39. They wouldn't go to 40, because if a person died from the whipping and they exceeded 40, if they gave them 41 lashes and the person died, they would be liable to murder. So to be on the safe side, they stopped at 39. If the person died, oh, well, that's too bad for them. Okay. But a Jewish whipping was done with a whip, like we've all seen, the long, smooth piece of leather. But a Roman scourging was an entirely different thing. And that was, next to crucifixion, the most feared punishment. It was sometimes administered to chastise someone. And Pilate seems to hope that by scourging Jesus, this will satisfy them. Luke mentions that, and John mentions that. He administers a scourging to sort of teach somebody a lesson. But a Roman flagellum was the instrument used for a scourging, and it had a sort of a thick handle, and there was a braid of different strands of leather, and then it branched out, and at the end of several strands, there would be 7, 8, 9 strands of leather. At the end was a sharp piece of metal. So when it hit somebody, it didn't make a smooth mark like a whip would, but it dug into the flesh, and then it would pull out a little piece of flesh. Well, that happens with every strike. That happens 7 or 8 or 9 times. And with repeated strikes, the person was left really a bloody ribbons of, the bag was ribbons of flesh, and a lot of blood was lost. You could survive a scourging, but so it wasn't intended to kill anybody. It was intended either as a precursor for crucifixion, and crucifixion was always accompanied by scourging. They would always scourge someone first, because you couldn't die easily by crucifixion. It didn't release a lot of blood. Okay. So crucifixion was always preceded by scourging, unless you were a woman. Women were not scourged. But it was also done in lieu of more severe punishment. So Pilate's hoping that just by scourging Jesus, that will be enough to satisfy, that they will feel that Jesus has been punished enough. And it's so fascinating, because he brings Jesus forward, and Jesus, and by the way, you could die from a scourging if it wasn't administered carefully. And it wasn't limited to 39 lashes. We don't know how many strikes of the flagellum Jesus received, but it was probably a very severe scourging. So if it was done properly, then the person wouldn't die. But the ends of the flagellum, those long strands with the metal tip, would whip around the body. They would not only hit the back, they would hit the legs, and they would rip around sometimes and hit the insides and the intestines. And sometimes people were scourged to the extent that it tore away the flesh, and their intestines were spilling out, and you could see other organs. So it was a very, very severe punishment, but not for killing. You didn't want to kill somebody by scourging. If they died, then the Romans usually know how far they could do it without killing someone. They didn't want to kill the person. But Jesus was so weak from the blood loss that he wasn't able to carry his cross. And normally people did carry their cross. So I think he got a pretty severe scourging. But I started to say, Pilate he's hoping that he won't have to crucify Jesus. So after Jesus has been scourged, he brings him forward and he says, behold the man, as if to say, look at him. Isn't this enough? And Jesus was a bloody mess. I mean, he was dripping buckets of blood. And it's not like there's some beautiful paintings where Jesus has a couple of marks on his back. And no, I mean, this was really, really bad. And rather than having any kind of pity, it seems to inflame them, almost like animals. They see him, and that's not enough. And so the Pilate is disgusted. They say, away with him, crucify him, crucify him. And Pilate is just disgusted by their reaction because he knows that Jesus hasn't really committed a crime deserving of death.